All right, good afternoon, everyone. This is John Cordle, and I'm here today to talk about crew endurance and fatigue management. We can go on to the first slide if you like. Okay, so every good training session starts with a sea story, and I'll start with this one, then I'll give you a little bit of background about myself. But this picture was taken on the night of this story, and it was taken from a ship right behind USS Oscar Austin as we transited the Kattegat-Skagerrak Strait towards the Baltic Sea back in 2002. The way this story goes, the captain's on the bridge. It's about 2 o'clock in the morning, been up for about 30 hours now. Most of it on the bridge as we did a narrow transit, 4 ships in formation heading south at about 15 knots. The captain has sort of dozed off. He's holding on to the wire, what Dr. Shattuck would call droning, not really present, probably present in body, but not in mind. And then some noise wakes him up because the bridge, which is normally pretty quiet, gets kind of rowdy. Sort of that noise wakes up the captain. The captain looks around and says, "Hey, navigator, off to the deck, where are we?" "Well, sir, we've not had a fix in about 6 minutes." "Okay. How close is shore water?" "Well, sir, about 2,000 yards, but I can't be sure of what direction." At this point, without any conscious thought, the captain just sort of reflectively takes the con, right? This is the captain. I have the con. All engines stop, rudder amidships. At this point, the XO says, "Hey, captain, that's great, but we got ships behind us that we need to tell them. So grab the bridge to bridge and go out across the net to the other ships. This is USS Oscar Austin. I have lost situational awareness. I've stopped my engines. Please remain clear." So the good news is we got a fix. We figured out where we were. We got back on track, and everything's good, right? Well, the next morning, not really. So the Commodore wanted to fly over to talk to me about how I managed to endanger the crew, the ship, and the mission by letting myself get so tired that I became unsafe. And so that was sort of the beginning of this journey. That was my first command tour. The second was USS San Jacinto, and I'll come to that one later on in the story. But that was the beginning of this sort of thought process of why crew endurance is so important, both to operations, but also to safety, and then later on to the well-being of our sailors. Next slide. Okay, so this is a great quote from Captain Nick Davenport, a mentor of mine and someone who started a lot of these concepts back in the early 2010 time frame. But you can read that for yourself. But the point is that fatigue is everywhere. It's in the cockpit, it's on the bridge, and it's down looking through the periscope. And we sort of ignore it. And the other one is A Time to Plant a Tree is 10 years ago. A friend of mine, when I was expressing some frustration about the Navy's progress in this area, reminded me that it takes time. And in a generation of naval officers in surface warfare is about 10 years. And so here we are in 2020, and that change is happening. Next. So to quickly define the problem on one page, this is a RAND sleep study from 2014 that shows the number of hours of sleep by civilian and by service population, military population. If you look at that black circle on the left-hand side, that's us, right? That's us in military and uniform. Over 40% sleeping less than 5 hours a night, and about 25% less than 6 hours a night. Having been on both sides of this fence, now I'm in the civilian workforce. I go to bed about 10 o'clock. My dog woke me up at 6, so I'm over there sort of in the green zone now that I've retired. But that's a problem, okay? And why is that a problem? Let's look at the next slide, and I think that we can walk through some of those issues. So whenever I talk to sailors about most items that I want to talk about, alcohol is a good common language. So one of the things to think about when you're talking about fatigue is it has much the same effect as alcohol on your performance. So just like we would never watch the helmsman or the officer of the deck drink back a couple of beers before they take the watch and say, "I'm just a little drunk," that would be completely unacceptable, right? And yet when we go to take the watch and we're tired, even though we kind of know that it's the same effect, we look the other way, or we used to. And so that's a good comparison that kind of resonates with folks that, hey, if you're tired, you're just the same as drunk. And that resonates with driving, whether it's your car or your ship. Okay. Next slide. Some of the things that we see at sea, and you know this if you've done this sea tours, I'm not going to read every one of them, but it's just tough to sleep at sea, whether it's the time the motion of the ship, the compartment that you're sleeping in, or our tendency to drink caffeine drinks and energy drinks before we go to bed. But at the end of the day, sleep at sea can be very challenging, and it have short, mid, and long-term effects to the sailors. Next. So this is from a postgraduate school study that talks about the short, intermediate, and long-term effects. And just to hit a few of them, and most of this you kind of already know, but just to reiterate, why do we care in the short term? Well, chronic or acute fatigue occurs when you just go without sleep for a long time in a single spurt, like 24 to 36 hours. You start to degrade your performance, increased exhaustion, decreased vigilance, lack of short-term memory, and increased stress, okay? Once you get beyond about 24 to 36 hours, you're starting to get into that 0.05 to 0.08 alcohol zone. This can also be replicated by staying up for 5 nights in a row for less than about 5 to 6 hours of sleep, like you saw on that first slide. Then you have the intermediate effects. So this could be like a deployment where you're on a non-circadian watch. It could be standing a shift rotation, perhaps in the shipyard, but it leads to poor memory, to memory loss. You don't train as well, and failure to accomplish the mission over time. And then what we're starting to get into is the long-term effects, something called circadian scarring, where if you stand watch on a strange rotation outside the circadian, you never quite recover. You can have disorders such as diabetes, long-term disease problems, and obviously after a while, if you're in the military long enough, you may decide this is not for you, and you may decide to get out. So it makes it tough to recruit people, and then old folks tell those stories about being sleep deprived and nobody wants to sign up. So so those are the short, intermediate, and long-term effects. And we kind of know this. These little yellow bumper stickers are sort of to spur some thought and discussion. But what do we do about it? And I should mention that this is the source of this is the Crew Endurance Handbook, which is one of those things, which is where the Navy has put a lot of the lessons learned into one place, and we've given you the website there. Next. Okay, and what about the captain or the XO, right? So a lot of times we put folks in a watch rotation and we think about their sleep, but what about the captain? If you've had command of a ship or been a department head, you know that not only is your sleep often truncated, but it's also interrupted all the time with calls and reports. So the postgraduate school actually did a 6-month study of a commanding officer of a destroyer and put one of these sleep watches on them to sort of track the sleep time. And you can see what they came up with. The green line is what they're supposed to be. The red line, about 5.2 hours, is what they averaged. And so this gets back to Mike C's story a little bit, and then also a note from Dr. Jonathan Shea about why it's so important for the commanding officer to take care of him or herself so that they can take care of the crew. He actually calls it a moral imperative, a moral responsibility for self-care. And we'll come back to this a little bit later under the responsibilities. Okay, next. So talking to ship handlers or perhaps pilots, if this is a wing, we always talk about controllable and uncontrollable forces. So a couple of points on the top slide. If you're handling a ship, you can't control the wind, you cannot control the currents or the seas, but you can control your rudder and your engines. And we get ships almost everywhere they're supposed to go with just those two things. So we learn to control what we can and to account for what we can't. By the same token, with crew endurance, it's about uncontrollable forces, your manning, your ship schedule. You can't change those. What you can change is your watch rotation and your daily routine. And then again, the thought bubble there, what's the mindset, what paradigms are you fighting on the ship, and what's the culture on your ship or in the larger Navy? Okay, next. So look at that last slide and think about when those things go wrong, right? Either way, failure to compensate for the uncontrollable forces has the same result. In this case, this was the USS Port Royal after a day-long underway trying to come back in at night, and you can see the results there from the safety survey that sort of map back to the stuff we've already been talking about. But look at the date on this, June 2009, and hold that thought for a while. Okay, next. So there is a way to get at this. We talked about controllable forces. The most controllable one, the one with the hugest, with the largest impact, is the use of a circadian watch. By circadian, I mean it adds up to a 24-hour day. So if you look at this slide, you can see the number of watch sections across the top, and more watch sections is better, and shorter watches is better. Those are the two sort of guidelines. So if you can You can follow that to its logical conclusion. If you can get to 4 sections, then a 3 on 9 off watch is sort of the best rotation you're going to have. If you're in 3 sections, maybe 4 on 8 off, there's a couple of other combinations that can get you there. But it's all about a circadian watch where you stand the same watch every day and as short a watch as possible. So this is a tool that's on that website that's available for any surface or other watchstander or senior watch officer or leader to look at and make those decisions. Okay, next. So the idea behind crew endurance is that it's not just a watch bill and it's not prescriptive in nature. In other words, it doesn't tell you exactly what watch to set up. It doesn't tell you exactly what to do with your day. It's about guiding principles. The first one is focusing on alert and engaged sailors. Your watchstander is part of the kill chain, may have the safety of the entire crew around with keys around their neck or with binoculars in their hands, and they have to be at their best. It's about elite team performance. It's about being at your top of your game. The most important part of that is understanding it, right? Educating yourself on what is good sleep hygiene, what are good practices. We talked about the circadian watch. What we haven't really dug into yet is the supporting schedule, okay? So the fact that you stand watch at a certain time every day, now you have to readjust your meal hours, your working hours, when you can get tools and equipment and things like that. It's important to remember that one size doesn't fit all. Not everybody can stand the same watch. Not every ship can man the same watch stations. So there's always going to be trade-off. It requires leadership engagement. But it's not on your own. Between the Type Commander staff and the postgraduate school, we can take a look at your watch bill, figure out what the weak points are, what the strengths are, how to improve it, and make it better. So think about these guiding principles as the way to approach this problem. Okay, next. Some key considerations down into the details: protected sleep. So we rarely disturb someone when they're on watch because they're supposed to be focused on watch. So the concept of letting someone sleep is a bit foreign sometimes, but it really is part of the equation. If you don't have to wake that sailor up or that officer up for that event, if they can delegate to their subordinate and let them take the brief or give the training, that will help. And then thinking about the whole plan of the day. You have to have mission and operational requirements. Think about those controllable forces. Educate yourself to understand that you can't just, you can't sleep all day Sunday and then not sleep Monday night. It just doesn't work that way, right? There's short-term paybacks, but in the end, it's not something you can bank. Maintain a dialogue with your boss, right? Like I have seen ships try to do this, but then their strike group commander or the group that they're operating with just torpedoes the entire plan with their schedule, sometimes when they could make a small adjustment and not have that happen. And, if you find yourself in a position where you're not fit to do a dangerous evolution, like an underway replenishment or flight ops, then you can try to opt out, okay? The world probably will not end. One of my friends is an airline pilot, commercial pilot, former Navy guy. He said, hey, look, if I show up at the airport and I haven't slept for whatever reason, I haven't had my mandatory crew rest, I call a 1-800 number and I report that I'm not fit to fly, and I don't fly. And there's no retribution because I have 300 lives in my hands, and we're just not going to take that risk. So that's a culture, that's that culture change, that mindset that we talked about. That, hey, if I miss the unrep today or the flight ops today, probably be okay compared to crashing a helicopter or having a collision. Next. So one challenge that comes up is I just can't get everybody to the same rotation. Maybe I don't have the manning. Maybe I have people off the ship or sick. And so how do I adjust that? Well, the key is to lay it out on paper and kind of look at them and figure out where the friction points are, and then adjust, okay? So maybe you have to open the breakfast line up early to catch one watch rotation and keep it open late to catch the next rotation. Maybe you put the CSs, the cooks, and the servers in a circadian rotation. So the one group does breakfast and lunch, and one does lunch and dinner. That way nobody works more than a 12-hour day. So those are all considerations that you can toss in there to try to make this work. The other thing to think about, and we'll talk about this later, is how do I berth, right? Could I rearrange the berthings so that folks in the same rotation are close to each other, not waking each other up? Okay, next. This applies in port. Later on in my career, I had a young officer get off of it was a mid shift where we worked 7 days of mids, and on the 7th day he got off work got in his car and fell asleep at the wheel driving home. You can see the little area here on the slide on a day after a duty day where you're dipping down. That's called a fast graph. It's sort of your effectiveness. And it can be, again, the equivalent of having too much to drink. And so think about in port how you can adjust the workday for some people if need be to make it more efficient. Maybe you can avoid that crazy traffic at the gate at 5:30 in the morning by moving turnover a little bit later. Maybe you dedicate some of your key personnel like fire marshals to a shift rotation, so there's always someone awake and alert. Maybe you just don't do high-risk evolutions after working hours, okay, or do duty weekends or something like that. Should mention here that under COVID, a lot of ships are having to come up with some unique duty rotations to try to minimize the number of people on the ship at one time and the exposure. And so that's a good place to give that a second look in terms of crew endurance just for safety. Okay, next. So over the years, we've done a lot of studies. Postgraduate school has probably done 40 or 50 shipboard studies, and they kind of come down to the same thing. Sleep at the same time every day. Do a circadian watch, okay? Provide this thing called protected sleep. The concept of having people sleep on a surface ship in the daytime is just sometimes too much, right? But it's almost imperative that you have that mindset if you're going to do this successfully. We say 2 weeks, that's the minimum time to get adjusted. When you rotate forward. But sometimes ships prefer not to rotate at all. I was on one ship where they actually went back and said, you know, we would like to keep it as long as we can, like between port visits, so that people get into a routine and they just stick with it. And we just adjust the daily routine to support them. So again, flexibility, just some best practices. Okay, next. Of course, with any set of goods, there's always others. So this is a collection of quotations that I have heard or the crew endurance team has heard from junior people. Those are the bullets in the middle of the slide, where we had this thing called an all-awake period, which is a common term which probably needs to go away. No changes to meal hours, so we had to miss a meal. The boss would call me no matter what, and I couldn't delegate. Like if I was the ops officer, I couldn't let the division officer give a brief when I was supposed to have my protected sleep. So those were all things that the leadership could have been paying attention to. And then those little bullets are actual quotes that I've been told from junior people that they've been told by their commanding officer or executive officer over the past 2 or 3 years. So if you're in a leadership position and you say stuff like this, even if you're being funny, it carries a lot of weight, and it can sort of undo the program and the mindset that you're trying to build. Okay. So crew rest, it does apply to the helicopter folks, but it also applies to the shipboard folks as well. Next. Okay, in summary, this is not just a watch bill, but it's a process. Make sure people understand the why, okay? Build the circadian watch bill, build a circadian schedule, look at things like meal hours, training, general quarters, look at your berthing. Is it in good condition? You know, as XO, I walk through there every day. I'm looking for cleanliness, I'm looking for stowage, but am I looking at the temperature? Am I looking at the mattresses? Am I making sure that everybody has rack curtains? Am I making sure that that their lights work? Okay. Have you thought about shifting the racks, berthing racks around, the rack assignments to match the watch rotation? You know, one of the things about these watches is the ship gets in a routine. So you form a coherent watch team from the bridge to combat to the engineering spaces. Next thing you know, people know each other, they work out together, they train together, and so you have an opportunity for a secondary effect of kind of team building, better morale. And you can see here that slide, that chart is kind of goofy, but the green means people liked it better for those reasons that we talked about. And then you can see that of all the items, the 3-9 watch bill became kind of the most popular among the sailors. The other piece of this is a leadership challenge, okay? Constant attention to the schedule, constant listening to the sailors. The people with the problems aren't going to share the problems unless you actively go after them and ask them, why are you not getting your sleep? And they may be hesitant to tell you, right? I could think of at least one example where the ship routinely played a wake-up song at 6 o'clock in the morning, which is motivating and fun. But if you're standing that mid to 3 watch or that 3 to 6 watch, and that's your sleep time, you know, banging out ZZ Top and is probably not the best thing for that protected sleep period. So look for those solutions and then reward them, okay? Make sure you call people out when they do well. We've had a couple of ships put in. I've seen a couple of ships put in articles for Navy, for the Navy to put out public affairs articles, examples like that. So lots of opportunity to build on the success, and share your stories with the postgraduate school or the type commander safety offices, and get the word out. Okay, next. Wouldn't be a good discussion in today's environment without the discussion of immunity. Okay, so viruses, COVID, whatever the bad diseases are, your body is more resistant when it's better rested. In fact, it's almost twice as resistant if you sleep more than 7 hours a night compared to 6 or less. So another reason to pay attention to this as we want to minimize the impact of the COVID virus on our forces. Okay, next. So I think this might be the last slide or second to last. Just to sum up, there's a fire triangle, right? You're familiar with that, where you have heat, oxygen, and a combustible substance. Well, there's a sleep triangle as well. It's got a couple of pieces to it. It's got protected sleep, okay, so giving people time to sleep. Habitability, giving people a good place to sleep, like we talked about. And then on the right-hand side are some key principles here. So at the type commander level, the goal is really just to give you some guidelines, okay? Circadian watch, protected sleep. How you do that, that's up to the ship, the commanding officer, the department heads, XO, looking at the berthing, looking at the schedule, and making sleep and rest an operational priority. But probably the most important part of this entire discussion is the idea of personal responsibility, okay? Just as you would never show up drunk to a watch, just as you would never skip a meal where you couldn't concentrate, you have to pay attention to your own sleep hygiene, limit caffeine before bedtime, screen time, exercise when you can, pay attention to nutrition. And when you have the opportunity to sleep, sleep, right? And who owns that? You do, okay? Next. Okay, opportunities. So if you are in a ship leadership position, which many of this audience is, there's ideas where you can get engaged, okay? There's one-stop shopping on the website. There's a crew endurance handbook. They can evaluate the watch rotations and give you advice. And there are availabilities, even under the COVID restrictions, for on-site training, mostly either a visit to the ship by one person or via a virtual session, okay? If you are interested in sort of accelerating the process, they're always looking for ships to do studies or experiments. Always, if you have good or bad feedback, it's great to share it. And if someone has an example of someone who's really done great, share that up with the leadership and get something out there to sort of spread the word, okay? You can do that via the website. You can send it to your PAO. Lots of opportunities to share the good news out there. I have to be honest, I was sort of uninformed in my second command tour. I knew I wanted to do something. I heard this crazy watch rotation, and I just wasn't convinced. And then we got underway, and I will tell you that as a commanding officer, I've never seen a single change have this much difference and make this much difference in the morale, in the operational effectiveness, and just the overall performance of the ship. So it really is not about just coddling your sailors. It's about operational performance. It's about elite team performance, and it's about operational excellence. And it is part of the culture that we want to go forward as we take our ships in harm's way. Okay, next. Yep, so just to sum that up, I'll let you read that. You can see the cartoon. That cartoon is probably about 10 years old, and maybe at some point we'll bury that hatchet, and it won't be a badge of honor anymore, right? It'll be, I'm well rested. And it'll say, why? And you'll say, you're slow, right? Just one last sea story on the denying sleep to your enemy. So USS San Jacinto on our deployment. In an ASW, anti-submarine exercise against a Navy with diesel subs. And we pinged away actively and sort of chased them around and kept them in shallow water. And at the end of the exercise, we met, and the captain says, you know why I lost this exercise, this portion, correct? And I said, no, why? And he goes, because you kept me on the bridge. I'm in my Navy in a small submarine. If we're in shallow water, the captain has to be on the bridge. So I was on my feet for almost 48 hours and I got punch drunk and I made terrible mistakes, and that allowed you to corner me and catch me. So it really is a weapon. It really is as important as ammunition or food. And as the bottom says, it's about elite performance and maintaining a tough job that we have at sea. But you would not skip a maintenance check on your body, on your equipment, right? You wouldn't skip a PMS check on your equipment. And so sleep is a daily one or a daily check on your body that you really need to pay attention to. And with that, I'll wrap it up. And in this forum, there's no questions, but you can always send an email, and you probably know where to find me. Thanks.